Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another exciting episode of Jacob Walks Over a Bridge. I'm Jacob. I'm currently walking over a bridge, and the faster I get to work, the faster I get to eat the bagel that's in my bag. That's right. Sitting in my bag is one sesame seed bagel with plain cream cheese and a bunch of olives on it. Not the olives I would typically put on a bagel, of course, which would be a good Kalamata. I'm out of that. Didn't want to pick up any major groceries before going on my trip at the end of this week, going to Philly. Don't know how many bridges I'll cross in Philly. Maybe one. There's at least one there I know of that I could walk across. But I have a whole bunch of Spanish olives with the red pimentos that need to be eaten, so I just slopped a whole bunch of those on there and made a good bagel. I wouldn't necessarily say that the bagel is good. It's not the best bagel I've ever had, let's just say that. I decided to try a new bagel place in Astoria that I'd never actually been to before. You think I've been there for over 2 years now. You'd think I'd have scoped out all the bagel places and tried them all, but no, there are still a few that have evaded my research, namely ones on the other side of the elevated tracks. I haven't really explored that area in any way for too long. One of the best halal food places I know is over on that side. The interesting Socrates sculpture park is over there. But aside from that, I haven't really walked on that side too often. Yeah, the sooner I get to work, the sooner I get to eat it, which I guess is some incentive for walking faster than normal. So if I seem a little bit out of breath as I'm going up and down the bridge, you know why. I'd say that bagels are an important part of my life. Hold on, there's a train coming. Can you hear me as the train's coming? Let me know so I know I can talk while the train is going, or if I need to pause like I pretended to do before giving you this message. Now, where was I? Bagels. They're one of my favorite breakfast options. Growing up, there'd always be some bagels in the house. At a young age, I learned what the just right amount of cream cheese is, the proper way to top a bagel, how to get the right amount of lox on there. I know. I figured it all out. Even if you go to my LinkedIn, the first job there isn't when I was a camp counselor or when I was working as a museum guard. It was bagel cutter. There's a little backstory behind that. When I was 13, my family switched synagogues. The synagogue we had been at had only about 50 families and was slowly falling apart. So we jumped ship to a synagogue that's about 10 times the size, around 500 families. And they had robust programming for kids my age, or namely after your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah. Whenever you would go through that, you'd be invited to go to what they called Hebrew high school. So from 11 to 1 o'clock, you got to eat breakfast, and they got you to participate in some Jewish programming. Always fun. But from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the morning, if you so chose, you could work for $5 an hour to do whatever they deem necessary around the synagogue. And I know that was fairly below the minimum wage, and for only 2 hours a day, 2 hours a week really, because they only did it on Sundays, at least that I remember. Didn't really make much money from that, but gave me something to do. And one of the first tasks that, you could be put in charge of anything from cleaning up places to helping prepare the breakfast for the Hebrew high school kids who came in at 11. Or as in my case, I was put in charge of cutting bagels for parents. So the synagogue, I don't know how often they came, but they would get deliveries of H&H Bagels, a New York City landmark who do a lot of shipments of bagels around. I don't know if they still do it, but they traditionally have been open 24 hours a day because you can, that way they can keep baking bagels round the clock to be shipped out wherever. I actually visited one fairly late hour when I was in high school. I did what's called a midnight run, where not necessarily at midnight, but you go late at night with a whole bunch of supplies for homeless people, and you go to specific locations and you hand out food, clothing, that sort of stuff. Things that people donated. I did that with the high school's honor society my senior year, and then at the end of that, probably right around midnight, we went to H&H and got bagels. That was definitely a highlight of that trip, and H&H provided the bagels for the synagogue, which is fairly a nice perk considering that Westchester bagels are not known to be good. There are very few, if any, exceptional bagel places in Westchester, which is fairly surprising given its proximity to New York City. Long Island, on the other hand, has no shortage of good bagels that people will sing their praises from whatever rooftop they can get on. I've had some, they're alright, I prefer New York City bagels, of course. Creme de la creme of bagels. This is the bagel mecca of the world. But Long Island has good bagels. Westchester, not so much. You have better luck on, Trader Joe's has some of the better bagels in Westchester. That gives you an idea of the state of bagels in the county just to the north of New York City. And thankfully I was blessed growing up. My dad often who worked in the city, would bring a dozen back home, and I'd be able to eat a good bagel, albeit it was frozen, but once you defrost it, cut it, toast it, it could be in the freezer for a day or 2 months, and you really wouldn't know the difference. Going back to the H&H at the synagogue, what would end up happening with those is we'd get a big box of all the flavors, everything from everything to blueberry. Blueberry was oddly popular. Don't know why. I guess, people like their sweet bagels. I'm not the biggest fan of those. I much prefer my savory bagel. But blueberry, everything, plain, sesame, poppy, multigrain, whole wheat, pumpernickel. If you could think of a flavor that's not some weird rainbow unicorn bagel, we probably got it in one of those boxes. And what we would do is we'd cut them all up. Probably take the first half hour, 45 minutes of that 2 hour period was to cut up bagels. And meanwhile, we would sell them to the parents of kids being dropped off for regular Hebrew school. I guess kindergarten up till 7th, 8th grade, when these kids, or 7th grade, I guess, is probably the last year that they would do before having their B'nai Mitzvah. So when the parents would come, we would sell bagels to them. There was a variety of cream cheese, butter. We had, it was like $2 for a bagel and cream cheese, a $1.50 for bagel and butter. Pretty decent pricing when all things considered, I guess. If you take into account the price that they're paying for membership at this synagogue, and it was a fairly high price, I guess it all evened out in the end, the price. But yeah, that was my first job, cutting bagels. We'd cut them for, like I said, 30, 45 minutes, and you just hang out. I worked with a variety of people over the course of my 5 years there. Some people graduated, some people started out on bagel duty, then they moved on to what they considered to be bigger and better things. But I was always happy to go hang out, cut bagels, and just relax there for a bit. And I have noted this on my LinkedIn, but I only cut my finger once during that whole tenure as bagel cutter in chief at the synagogue. It wasn't even like that bad of a cut. It was just more of a nick. I guess I don't even remember the actual necessarily, though. I do remember it was just once. And I didn't need stitches. It was probably didn't even need a Band-Aid. It probably just was more of a nick. But I guess that's something to be proud of, that for all the hundreds, maybe possibly thousands of bagels I cut, only happened once. And now I would consider myself to be a good bagel cutter, and it's surprisingly difficult sometimes to cut a bagel. People don't realize the skill that's involved. There's the technique. There's a reason why I didn't cut myself. It's because I have amazing technique. You have to, the way that I would do it, I'm going to share some of my industry secrets with you. Is you start out with the bagel flat on the cutting board. You always should use a cutting board. You take the knife, you align it just with about the middle, or you're going vertically up, about the center, so that way you'd have an evenly cut bagel. And slowly with I'm a righty, so with your good hand, you start cutting. Your other hand, you hold the bagel on the other side of the hole. So you're never going to get to the point where you're cutting into your hand, because once you get about a third of the way through cutting the bagel, you already have a decent position in the bagel. You're not going to lose the cut. You flip the bagel 90 degrees, so that way it's standing up on its side. That with the part you've been cutting on top, and where your hand had been is on the bottom of the cutting board, and then you just cut down. And that's that way you ensure that you get a good straight cut based off of where you were. There might be a little bit of a jagged edge from the initial, when you start out, to where, because when you flip the bagel, you're not always going to get the same angle. It'd be hard, but for the most part, you're going to get a good evenly cut bagel, and that obviously assumes that this bagel is normal shaped, equal on all sides, which sometimes isn't the case. Depends on how the bagel is packaged. Sometimes it can get damaged, and the one side might be squished, so that way you have to have a big side and a little side. If that's the case, you always start on the little side, so that way you have the best chance of not getting some awkward cut where like half the bagel is not really cut and you only cut one, so always get the best cut. Always start with the small side. Even if there's a bagel that's on the outset, you think, oh, this is a normal sized bagel. It looks like it has even sides. There usually is a side that isn't as well developed, so to speak. Make sure you start with that side. And always make sure you use a good knife. Granted, now I can cut a bagel with almost any, give me a coffee stirrer and I could probably cut a bagel decently. If you have a blunt object like that, like sometimes you go to a party or event or you're kiddish and the bagels are uncut and all you have are plastic knives. That's when you got to do a 360 cut. Oftentimes with bagels, this is a product of how they're baked. It won't be 100% round, so like you'll have nice smooth all the way around. Then at a certain point there'll be a flat part. Usually, it doesn't have the nice exterior, but it's kind of softer. It's more. It reminds you more of what the inside of the bagel is actually like, just on the outside. Think of it as like I was going to call it the eye of the bagel, but I guess you would think that would be what the hole is. That's just the hole. So I'm going to call it the eye. Yeah, it's going to be a Jacob term. The eye of the bagel is that little flat part where you can really get any sort of blunt object in there with relative ease, if the bagel is fresh and soft. So let's say you got your flimsy plastic knife. You should be easily able to jab it in there, maybe wiggle it around, give a little bit of a cutting motion, trying to get it in. And once you break through to the center, to the hole, that's when you start doing your 360 cut. So, let's say you're holding your knife in your good hand and holding the other side of the bagel in your other hand. For this, you don't use the cutting board. You have to. It's important to be able to hold this in your hands. A, it's a plastic knife, and B, you should never be going anywhere close to your other hand, so I consider this to be relatively safe. You should take the knife and slowly start spinning the bagel and cutting at the same time. So that way you are, by the end, the bagel should have made a 360 rotation in your hands, and the blunt object, essentially, should have been able to cut through most of the bagel with I'm not going to say relative ease, but you should have a cut bagel doing that. It's not going to be the easiest thing, but it'll get done, and you'll have a fairly respectable cut. Your friends and family are going to be very jealous if they're very awkwardly cut. Maybe they just ripped it open. That's how you do. You have to respect the bagel. Respect the cut, and that's the way to do it with that. I've never actually had to cut a bagel with a coffee stirrer before, though I imagine I'd have somewhat, I'd be able to do it. I'm not going to try to do that anytime soon. I'd only do that if it were an emergency and I'd have no other choice. Always use a knife if you can. But for any sort of knife, you now know how to cut it. And I hope that this was a more educational moment with that. There's a reason why on SoundCloud that I tag these videos as education, because I do hope you learn something or are inspired to learn something. Today you learned how to do bagels, how to cut them. I can tell you more about bagels. I have still plenty of time and a vast knowledge of what makes a good bagel. There's more to a bagel than just being a roll with a hole. Rolls with holes are the worst sorts of bagels because essentially, it's just the baker just decided, I'm just going to make a roll and put a hole in it. Bagel. That's not how it works. That's not how any of that works. You have to, if you want that good New York City bagel, it's to be big, bready, and boiled. The boiling gives it its texture. You can also mini bagels have some allure to certain crowds. When I was 7, they were the coolest thing. No, I want my bagel big. I want it big and chewy, bready and chewy. I don't want it to melt in my mouth. I want to have to work for that bagel. I want to have to chew it and savor it and now I'm making myself hungry. The bagel I have with me is just okay by New York City standards. It's not, it's an average size. I can't say for sure though if they boiled it or how they prepared this bagel, but sometimes you can tell how a bagel's texture is going to be just from the outset when you're cutting the bagel. When you're holding the bagel in your hands, when you feel how the knife goes through the bagel, you really get an idea before you even taste it what this bagel is going to feel like, how it's going. The weight could tell you that just how much oomph is going to be behind every bite. When you cut it, you realize, okay, this is just like cutting a loaf of bread, or wow, this is a bagel. A bagel is a different texture. There's a part of it that's just indescribable. I think what you're gonna have to do after listening to this is go to your local bagel shoppy and pick up half dozen, just one. Don't cream cheese it there. Bring it back and try to do your own cut. Try to, experiment. See how much cream cheese you want to put on. And I think there's something that makes a bagel that you do yourself just a little bit better than, it's the opposite of a regular sandwich, where sandwiches taste far better when someone else prepares them for you. But with a bagel, I feel like it tastes better when I do it. I know exactly how I like it. If I'm toasting it, I know the right level of toast. I know the right amount of cream cheese I like. I know how much. Alright, I just got distracted because there's a guy who was biking down. I'm at the end game now. I'm on the downward slope into New York. This podcast is going to be over soon, this episode, but there's a guy who was zipping along down, no helmet, with a giant bag of what I assume to be plastic bottles, but you can't tell because it's just a giant plastic bag sitting on the handlebars, and there he is, barely being able to look. He has one hand on the handlebar, one hand on his giant bag, and with he could barely see over it, and just trying to maneuver his way down while at exceptional speed. So you could imagine why I got a little distracted by that. But yeah, there's something nice about eating a bagel that you prepared, which is what I did today. On that note, I think I've made you all fairly hungry, and I think it's time for me to sign off. It's been a wonderful time again, especially now that I'm just walking to work on a Monday instead of Sunday, which is always nice to do it on the day I'm supposed to be coming into work. But I hope you had a great time, and I hope you guys eat your own bagels. And now I'm gonna, look, my shortest episode yet. You wonder why. All right, well, good day and good night.